Hi everybody, my name is Glenn Holland, and today we'll be taking a look at my newest model, the San Diego and Arizona Railway 280 Locomotive 104. Now I won't go into too much detail on this locomotive, certainly not as much as my number 13, and I'll explain why in a little bit, but for now I'll give a brief history of the San Diego and Arizona. It was originally chartered in 1904, but due to many delays as well as the onset of World War I, it was only completed in 1919. The railroad ran from San Diego through a part of Mexico and through the treacherous Carrizo Gorge, which is a very famous part of the line. The railroad was sold to Southern Pacific in 1932, and a few months later, in 1933, the San Diego and Arizona Eastern was incorporated and assumed operations over the line. Passenger service ended in 1951 due to a decrease in ridership, and currently some of the line is operated by the Pacific Southwest Railway Museum, who also owns the 104 and several other pieces of SD&A rolling stock, as well as other pieces of equipment. The 104 was originally a Southern Pacific locomotive built as their number 2720 in May 17, 1904. It's classified as a C8, the C standing for consolidation, meaning it's a 280 locomotive. It had 57-inch drive wheels, 22 by 30 cylinder bore and stroke respectively, roughly 192,000 pounds on the drive wheels, and it was a superheated design. The San Diego and Arizona purchased the locomotive from Southern Pacific in January of 1922 and renumbered it as their number 104. During its time on the SD&A, it starred in several movies, including a promotional film called Carrizo Gorge. When the San Diego and Arizona Eastern was incorporated in 1933, it was relettered for the SD&AE but retained the number 104. In May of 1941, it went back to the Southern Pacific and was renumbered as 2720 once again and used in various locations on the Southern Pacific. And during the year 1940, it had a tender swap to a Vanderbilt-style tender. In March of 1948, the locomotive returned to the San Diego and Arizona Eastern and was renumbered once again to 104, but a few months later in September of that year, it returned once again to the Southern Pacific system, but retained the lettering and numbering. Sometime between 1951 and 1955, it received a second tender swap, which is the one that it carries today, another Vanderbilt-style tender, and it was finally retired on October 18th of 1954. On September 2nd, 1955, it was donated to the Pacific Southwest Railway Museum along with SD&AE business card number 050, where they both currently await full restoration. Now, the reason I'm not going into as much detail as I would on, say, another locomotive that I would be building is because technically this is not my locomotive. Now, I did do the design of the locomotive and I did build it, so it is my locomotive in that sense, but now that it's complete, I'm actually not going to be keeping it. So this is actually a commission project that I started in late June of this year after reaching an agreement with my customer. Now, I found this to be a really enjoyable and quite awesome project from start to finish. And that's because I never would have considered building a locomotive like the 104 or even researching the SD&A. But now that I've done the commission project, I know a lot more about it than I would have. And it's been really fun to learn something completely new and different than what I usually tend to model. And it's been a really nice project, and I'm really excited to hand it off to my customer. Now, I'll get in more on the handoff in a little bit, but a little bit more information on the commission project. My deliverables include the model of the locomotive, the LDD file where I originally designed the locomotive, a few sets of extra connecting rods, and an owner's manual which includes some disassembly instructions and other things. Now, while this is a paid commission project, I would like to say that this is not something that I did for the money specifically. In honesty, I did take on the project out of complete interest in the project and really just for the sake of doing it. I consider it a high honor to be approached from someone who wants me to build a custom one-off model for them, and I was really excited to do the project, so that's why I did it. It wasn't at all about making money off of the locomotive or selling anything. It was quite just an enjoyable experience, and I found it to be really fun. So that's my reason for taking on the project. I'll be delivering this locomotive to my customer actually at the Cantini Park train show like I went to last year in December. He's actually going to be flying in from his home state, and we'll be meeting up at the show, and I'll be hanging it off to him there. Well, we'll be able to operate it on the NILTC layout. Now, you may have already noticed, but this model does bear some similarities to both my number 13 and the Brickmania S160, and that's because, well, they're built off of the same platform. All three of these locomotives use the same powertrain and the same size drive wheels, so it was really easy to build this locomotive just like it was for 13. I count that as a blessing though, and it was really easy to just build the locomotive from that starting point rather than having to re-engineer a whole bunch of other components. And so I could just build the model more quickly and obtain a nice finished product a little bit faster and add a little bit more detail in that time. So bearing all that in mind, it does use one Lego L motor and an IR receiver, and I was able to put a battery box in the tender of the locomotive. It includes lights from Brick Stuff. Actually, my customer sent me a light kit that he had got for the Brickmania S160 to put in this locomotive, and so I had Brick Stuff install it in the headlight as a custom job for me. And so he actually sent me the motor and the IR receiver as well, just to take the cost down of the project, which was really nice actually. So I didn't have to find the motor or IR receiver myself. The lettering and numbering, as well as the red trim on the windows, is a really striking job, and one of my favorite parts of the finished model, and that was all done by my friend Richard at Brick Print Studios. So that means that all of the lettering and numbering and the red trim is printed directly on the parts. There are no decals on the model. I think they turned out really well, and I'm really looking forward to using Brick Print Studios again for another project. So now I'll give a little bit more of a detailed look at the locomotive. Here you can see the pilot of the locomotive, and I modeled the front steps and cowcatcher as well as working couplers, so this locomotive can be used for switching and yard operations. We got the coupler cut bar here with the polling pockets on either side of the pilot beam, some steps here, and the front suspension detail as well. Now, one of the details that I was able to put in on this locomotive is that the entire pilot assembly here is rigidly attached to the frame of the locomotive. So that means that when going around a curve, only the pilot wheels themselves will swing out rather than the entire pilot beam swinging out, like my number 13 does. And I was really excited to put this in because it's much more prototypical to a real 280 locomotive, and it's a little bit easier, if I'm honest, to rail the locomotive, like when you're taking it out of the box and setting it down on the track. So I was really excited to be able to put this in, and I think it turned out really nicely. You can also see the number 104 here printed on the 1x2 cheese slope, which represents the number plate, the headlight as well, and then a signature Southern Pacific style curved grab iron around the front of the boiler. Now, since this does use Brick Stuff lights, and since it does use the S160 light specifically, their lights are wired into the IR receiver on the red tower, so that means that can be controlled from a Power Functions infrared remote, and I can turn the lights on like that. It's quite bright. Here's a look at the fireman's side of the locomotive, and one of the things that I was really proud of myself for doing was modeling the curved cylinders here on both sides. That was quite an interesting challenge, but I'm really happy with the design, and they work quite well and stay put very nicely. The number 104 was an inside valve gear locomotive, so there's no valve gear here on the outside of the locomotive like there was on my number 13 or the Brickmania S160 for that matter. Now, since the valve gear was all inside, there's only a very small amount of it that can be seen from the outside, which I modeled using some flex tube right here. Moving a little farther up the cab, I've got an air tank here and the air pump as well underneath the running board. The running boards themselves are tiles and clips attached to the side of the boiler, and then plenty of piping detail along the side as well, and underneath the cab. And here's a look at the cab, and right away you can see the sharp white 104 as well as the classification numbering and the C8 here on the back, as well as red window trim that's printed on the plastic glass piece and the front of the cab wall. I think that part turned out really nicely, and it's probably one of my favorite parts of the whole printing job. My customer specifically wanted to model the locomotive as it looked in the mid-1920s before it received the first tender change, so I modeled the original square tender here, as you can see. There weren't a whole lot of pictures to go from, so I had to use some small creative license with a little bit of detailing here on the front of the oil bunker and the rear deck as well. But it turned out really well, and it's a very reasonable assumption from other Southern Pacific locomotives that I am familiar with. There's just as much detail on the engineer's side of the locomotive too. There's another really long air tank hidden here underneath the running board, and the power reverse is actually mounted here just above the engineer's side cylinder, which has a linkage that goes all the way back to between the second and third drivers. I thought that was a really interesting detail, and I think the way that I modeled the reverse and the linkage turned out very nicely. And of course I have plenty of piping here underneath the cab and in front of the firebox and above the running boards as well. Looking now at the top of the boiler, I modeled the signature Southern Pacific flying number boards, 3 domes on the locomotive, the bell, the dynamo, and the whistle on the fireman's side. The cab design as a whole does share a lot of similarities to my number 13 locomotive, including the roof hatch, which can be posed open or closed like that. We're looking at the back of the tender now, and I have, of course, the rear reversing light, a ladder down the right side, and the number 104 printed on the rear of the tender wall. Now, this is something that I did not completely know whether or not they had on this locomotive during the time period that I was modeling in, but I approached my customer about it, and we both agreed that the number 104 looked really good on the rear of the tender wall, so we included it on the final model. I've got the engine separated from the tender now, and we're looking into the cab, and one of the things that I'm very happy with is the back head. I did put a lot of detailing in here with the different piping and appliances that are in the cab. The engineer is supposed to sit right here, and the fireman here just inside the cab wall. Now, this was an oil-burning locomotive, so it doesn't have traditional butterfly-style doors, so I just have a single round door with a viewing hole. It's modeled by this stud here. And of course I have the throttle and several other gauges and levers as well. I think it turned out really nicely, and I'm probably going to use similar techniques on other locomotives I'm going to build in the future. Now, I'm not going to record the engine running today, but I do have some older clips of it running before I had the light installed and before the printing was done of the locomotive running with a few cars on my floor, so I'll put them in now. Now, overall, I am extremely happy with the way that the model turned out. I think this is just as good, if not maybe slightly better, than my own Buffalo Creek and Galway locomotive that I finished earlier this year. I'm a little upset that I have to give it away now, but I did make sure to take a lot of pictures of the detailing work that I did, and of course I also have the original LDD file if I wanted to build another locomotive like this in the future. Now, I probably wouldn't build the 104 again specifically, but there are a few other Southern Pacific C8 locomotives that I might have an interest in as well, just to have something a little bit visually different in my collection. I would like to give a special thank you to Kale for helping me with the graphics. He did all the artwork for really everything. He did all the window here and the striping, 104 and the small lettering, and the San Diego and Arizona, as well as the front number plate as well. It turned out really well, and I'm very thankful for his help on the project. And of course, I'd like to thank my friend Richard at Brick Print Studios once again for doing the printing itself. I would like to give one final thank you to Rob from Brick Stuff for installing the light for me. It was a little bit of a tedious job, and he sent me pictures as he was doing it to make sure it is what I wanted, but his service was fantastic. The final job was perfect, and of course every locomotive looks good with an operating headlight. So thank you to Rob from Brick Stuff for your assistance as well. So I will, of course, be doing a vlog of my trip to the Cantigny Park train show. I'll be hanging out with Brickmania again and obviously delivering the locomotive to my customer at the train show, and we'll be running it as well while we're there, and I'm really excited for it. Be sure to look out for the vlog on my channel in the weeks following the show, where we'll be running the S160. It should be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to the show. Of course, we'll be hanging out with Brickmania again, and I can't wait to meet my customer face to face, and I can't really wait for him to see the locomotive in person either. I'm really looking forward to it. Lastly, thank you all for watching. I do appreciate all the support and the comments I get on the video. If there are any questions or comments on the locomotive or the video itself, please consider leaving them below. I'd love to interact with the people who watch my videos and answer any questions I can. And that's all I have for now, so I'll leave it there, but do look out for the Cantigny Train Show vlog on my channel, which will be hopefully uploaded in the few coming weeks. But I'll leave it there for now. Thank you all for watching and all your support, and I'll talk to you all later.